So I've mentioned previously that sometimes I struggle with the thing I want to talk about when I make these videos, because I have limited time, and with so much going on, what do I dedicate time to? And in this instance, for this week, for this video, I didn't have trouble. Because what I want to talk about is something that can have grave implications for our country. The right to free speech is one of the most foundational aspects of our country, of our democracy, and of Americans as a people. It was the First Amendment added to the Constitution. Before any of the others, there was the right to free speech, the right to free religion. The rights in the First Amendment, just like the rights in the Constitution, were not initially meant for everyone. There were groups of people that those provisions and those rules were meant to protect, and it left others out in the cold. And throughout history, what we've done with the rights in this country is that we've expanded them. That we've said more people should be included. Where we started with wealthy, landowning white men, we moved to people of color, we moved to immigrants, we moved to women, we moved to green card holders and permanent residents, and so many of our rights also just apply to anyone who is here. And that is foundational to us. And as these rights expanded incrementally out, each time they moved, it came at a great cost to the nation in terms of our effort and in terms of our struggle. Each expansion of these rights was hard fought and hard won. Because of this, you never want to see these roll back. You never want to see these rights that we've expanded contract. And so you have to guard those rights. The foundational element of our system of checks and balances as a country is that the three branches are co-equal, each having power to check the others to help settle the framework of how our country functions. Right? You have Congress, they write laws, they allocate money. You have the executive, who is tasked with faithfully executing those laws, being the commander-in-chief during war times, because the framers understood that a large group of people does not make for a consistent and quick response. And then you have the judiciary, meant to settle disputes between the branches and to act as an arbiter and a balance amongst them. The intent behind the balance of these three branches is that they each have power and that they each seek to guard their own power, to keep it from the other branches. But what we've seen is that there are times that the branches grant some of that power to others. And where we see this happen the most starkly is in Congress. So much of their power to legislate has been given to the judiciary to interpret their laws, and Congress refuses to write new ones. We've seen them give power to the executive. And there are times when these things make sense. Understandably, an individual can act more quickly than a deliberative body, such as Congress. And so it makes sense that sometimes those powers may shift, they may ebb and flow. But what we've seen more recently is that Congress has started to abdicate that power. Because the things that some people in Congress want are not things that the American people want. And so they risk their positions by passing unpopular legislation or by making things happen that people don't agree with. And so instead, what they do is they cede that power to someone else, to the executive, to say, hey, the executive did that cutting. The executive made those rulings. The executive enforced that thing. And even if they'd wanted it, now they don't have to take credit for it, for something that is deeply unpopular. And when they try to work within their own framework and the court strikes something down, well, then it's the court that is to blame. And Congress does this because it has developed a bit of a aversion to being disliked, which has led to it being more disliked, which has led to it ceding more power in an attempt to avoid being disliked. And because Congress has given so much of its power through either direct abdication or simply through lack of action, they have very few tools that they will use or that they can use to check the executive. Congress commands no military or law enforcement. The president does. And so when they write a law and it gets ignored, they have one option, and that is impeachment. Impeachment and removal gives them the final say in what the president can be allowed to do, what the executive branch can be allowed to do. But because this is such a drastic step, they are less likely and less willing to take that action. Likewise, we should jealously guard our rights so that they are not chipped away. And we should fight for them where they are. We should not be willing to cede ground and allow them to go away until the only bit of recourse we have is the most drastic option. Within the last couple of weeks, this administration, this regime, has decided that it can act with impunity, not just against the other branches, but more specifically against people, against our rights. A little over a week ago, Mahmoud Khalil was walking home with his 8 months pregnant wife when he was approached by 4 men in plain clothes on the street. They asked him for his identification, and they told him that his student visa had been revoked. When he and his wife told them, hey, I don't have a student visa, I have a green card. I'm a legal permanent resident. There was some confusion from these 4 men, from these 4 ICE agents, who made a call and after some discussion said, your green card has been revoked too. So they take him and they put him in an unmarked van and he's gone. When his wife and his lawyer go to where they were told to in New York to find him, to speak with him, to see him, as is his right. His right to counsel is the same as yours or mine. They've moved him to New Jersey, and then from New Jersey to Louisiana, in a blatant attempt to keep him away from his lawyer. And you'll have to ask yourself, what did he do to deserve this? Well, back during the summer, when there were protests around Israel and Gaza, the campus of Columbia became something of a sparking point. And there were protests there because of the investment that Columbia has in businesses in Israel. Khalil was part of the protest there, asking the college he attended to divest from Israel. Some will say that he was pro-Hamas, but that is not what I've seen in any of the research I've done, but simply that he was pro-Palestine, that he wanted an end to a protracted and bloody conflict between one strong nation and one weak one. nothing that happened on October 7th was good. Nothing that happened then was right. But that doesn't mean you can't advocate for less wanton death and destruction, for less civilians dying. And this is what he did. He is alleged to have broken no law. They call him a terrorist sympathizer because of those protests that he participated in. Protesting is free speech, and it is guaranteed in the same way that it is to me, to someone who holds a green card. And that is without question. Now, the law that they cite to try and remove him says that the Secretary of State has a broad discretion in removing people from the country based on national security interests. But a law that is unconstitutional is no law that gets to stand in this country. The Supremacy Clause states that the final law, the top law of our country, is the Constitution. And the rights granted in the First Amendment trump those laws that they are trying to use to deport this man, who they picked up at night, unmarked officers into an unmarked van, and then shuffled him around the country to keep him away from his lawyer. Around a week later, 200 individuals, slightly over 200 individuals, who were rounded up from our country, put on a plane, put on a couple of planes, apologies, and flown to El Salvador. These people didn't have hearings, they didn't have lawyers, they didn't have due process as we know it. And to be entirely honest, we don't know who all of them were or are. These were 200 people with barely any record of who they are, rounded up in our country, put onto planes, and then sent to El Salvador, when a federal judge ordered the Justice Department, ordered ICE to turn those planes around, because those people were being ejected from the country without any sort of due process, without any sort of hearing, without any sort of evidence or reasoning, or even assurances of who they were. That order was ignored, and that plane allowed to land in El Salvador. In San Salvador, specifically. And these 200 and some odd people were put into a 40,000 person mega prison, which has been cited numerous times for violations of human rights. We sent them there, and we paid for that as a country, and will continue to pay for their detainment there. Now, you'll notice I keep saying people and individuals. What I won't say is gang members, and what I won't say is immigrants. Because I want to be clear, we don't know who most of these people are. And the people we do know, there's no positive evidence for, at least the ones I've seen, that they are gang members. But what the Justice Department and what ICE have used as their justification for how they select them as gang members was tattoos. Just tattoos, not specific tattoos. I want to be clear, this isn't like Russian gang tattoos, which can tell a person's story. This is just any tattoo. If you were a person who was there who had a tattoo, congratulations, we're going to call you a gang member. A violent, dangerous gang member. So many of these people didn't have records, and plenty of them had evidence that they are not gang members. But again, we don't know all of them. There was also a case of a Canadian woman who had overstayed her visa, went to renew it, and then was locked up in detention for 2 weeks. Or the German man who was coming back from overseas, who was also, I believe, a lawful permanent resident, who was then detained and essentially tortured, stripped naked, put in a cold shower, till he passed out. And to be clear, he did pass out because he also had the flu, but again, stripped naked, ice cold shower, detained for a long period of time. And all of this, every bit of it, should scare you. It should concern you at the very least. Because right now, you may not be doing anything. Your speech may not be deemed improper by the powers that be. But how long does Trump really keep allies around him? How many people have fallen out of favor with him? And if he could make them go away forever, if he could just disappear them in the dead of night, doesn't he seem like the kind of guy who would do that? And if we give him that power for any one of us, then he has it for all of us. Our rights are sacred to us, inviolable. As a nation and as individuals, these are things we hold up to be the pinnacle of our place in the world, the rights we have. But we don't have them if we give them away. And so, what is to stop this administration, this regime, from picking you up in the middle of the night, shuffling you around the country, never telling your loved ones or your lawyer that you're there, so you don't get to argue your rights? You don't get a defense. And then what's to stop him from putting you on a plane to El Salvador and then not turning it around if you get lucky enough for a judge to know about it? What stops that? Except for us now. What stops that? Except for us acting in response to this. If we don't use some of the power that we as a group possess now, then eventually we too will only be left with the most dramatic option that we have, with the most dramatic right we have. And no one should want it to get there. We should stop it now. I happen to believe in the promise of this country, in the promise of America. And what makes us unique amongst almost every other country is that we don't share a long-standing heritage. We don't have long-standing cultural norms or 1,000-year-old traditions or 1,000-year-old buildings. The thing we share as a nation and as a people, and that everyone who comes here has, is a story. And yes, like all stories, it can get embellished at times, but at the core of the American identity is the story and the ideal that we have no kings, that all power derives from the people who are being governed, not from those doing the governing. And that people have rights that are inalienable. Our nation exists so long as we choose to defend it and to defend the rights that we as people have. But what can be done to the least of us can be done to the greatest of us. Our strength is in our numbers. And what the powerful seek to do is to take the number and divide it. If there are 1,000, they find a way to split us into two groups. And then they find a way to split those two groups into two groups, and again, and again, and again, and again, until they get to their ultimate goal, which, interestingly, is also part of the fabric of America: individualism. But they mean it not in a you can strive for what you want way, in the way it should be meant, in that I, in this place, in this time, can strive to be better, and am in a system that allows it. But what they mean is that when everyone is their own group and only cares about themselves, the unit of one person makes you infinitely weak. Because if you are one person without money, you are without power. But 1 million people without money have power. Your voices have power when they are not alone. During the Holocaust, Pastor Martin Niemöller wrote a poem that I'm sure you've heard, but I would like to repeat it now. First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. You and I and everyone you know are somewhere on a list like that. We are all someone. And the way identity works is that we are all multiple people. There's the me at work and the me at home and the me with friends. The me who's playing D&D has a different identity than the me who is doing science, than is the me who is doing these videos. Each one of me belongs in a different group. But list enough groups and you will find me there. And when difference or dissent is the metric by which enemies are chosen, eventually we all find ourselves on a list. It's just a matter of how far down you are. This regime is starting from the top. And they'll work their way down. They're starting with what they are claiming are easy targets. People who are not sympathetic to everyone. But to be clear, that shouldn't matter. Our rights are our rights, and they are ours to have and to defend. They are ours to ensure they remain for our children and their children, for our friends and our neighbors and our families, and for people we never met and may never meet. That we understand that we only work if we work together. Call your senators, call your House member, send an email. I'll leave links in the video description with a couple of easy ways to get in touch. It doesn't matter what party they belong to. Demand that they provide oversight and rebuke to these actions, that there's accountability, and that a lawful process is followed, that people have rights and that those rights are not taken. Because any of our rights hold the same weight. As soon as they take one, they can take all of them. In difficult times, it can feel like we are just striving to hold on. That we lack a hope for the future, and that all we can do is try and limit the damage. That bad things will come, and the best we have, the best we can do, is to try and make it hurt a little bit less. But in moments of our greatest strife and difficulty as a nation, we find our greatest unity. What comes out of these conflicts, what comes out of this upheaval, has always been better. Because we have unified together and understood that only by standing for each other do we have a chance to stand for ourselves at any point. So this is not just about holding on, but we have a choice. Either we, as a group, rise together, or we fall apart. And the question each of us has to ask ourselves, and the people around us, what is the worth of one person's rights? And they have to be equal. Because if they're not, understand that you won't be the one judging the worth of your own. Take care of yourselves, and especially take care of others. And I will see you next week.